the problem, or what am I helping with some solutions to create more conversations between, art educators, art therapists, and then also my people in disability community.
Thanks, Sandie. I love being in here with you guys. Hi everyone. So my name is Katie. Thank you, Matt, for introducing me. I also teach in the art therapy and counseling department at the School of the Art Institute, but I am not an art therapist. So I am a lecturer of MAD studies. So I come from sort of an outside perspective of looking and talking about psychiatry and all that. So for me, because I come from more of a MAD studies and art background, I kind of come to this title in a different sense, where for me, the title, not art therapy, it sort of reflects a kind of protest I've had to express to arts critics, mentors, like family members, just about my art, I think for almost all my life, or at least for as long as I've made art. And I think primarily it's because many struggle to separate the role of therapy and art conceived within a professional or personal practice versus artwork that's generated within a medicalized context with the facilitation of a licensed art therapist. That seems to be kind of where people get lost in the sauce, per se. And so as a mad artist that's directly creating work representative of my psychiatric disabilities, like I've noticed this resistance to critique work about madness or impairment in the same critical matter that work about like gender or race or sexuality or other forms of identity politics usually garner. And that kind of led me to realize that there's this like assumptive conflation of like disability or mad art with art therapy that is actually more pervasive than I realized. And I was like, oh. So I think after many fruitful conversations I've shared with you, Matt and Sandie, over these last 2 years or so, this like somewhat unspoken resistance to take disability or mad art seriously or as like credible, valuable works of art that are also independent from an art therapy context. Like I recognize there's like a need to like quite literally focus an exhibition that directly distinguishes these disciplines from one another. Like I don't really know of another opportunity where I've kind of seen these two modes of being, like disability art and mad art and culture, and then art therapy being like let's dig, let's make a little, I don't know what that's called, but I'm thinking of a pit that separates the two and talks about their similarities and their differences. And so in this gallery space with this title in mind, there is a variety of artwork that either like engages or responds to the title, but there's also artworks that are existing in the space by the very notion that it wasn't created with an art therapy setting. So I think that's just kind of how I approach the title and think about it.
Yeah, thank you both. It's I think for many people who don't have to think about these kinds of things, the idea of being sort of permanently medicalized, even in our artistic creations, can be devaluing both to our individuality and our capacity to do really incredible things. So I find too, as Katie, you were just mentioning, the exhibition does actually have a very participatory element to it. And there's something about that the collaborative and community element that is very centered around therapy, and art therapy embodies those elements within it. So I'm curious how both of you would see the participatory elements really acting within the context of the exhibition and your work.
This is Sandie speaking. I think that I see the existence of this exhibition as an opportunity for Katie and Matt and I to kind of actualize something together, because we have had this conversation for quite some time. And I think definitely I agree with Katie that this title is like a protest, but then also like a, taking on a more like defiance level, like of things like, well, that's not name everything that disabled people do as therapy, but then at the same time, like I think we can also raise the question that how do we find a place for people to name that we need community and we need therapy too. And so I think a lot of time people don't get the opportunity to have access to mental health, and then that's a huge issue. And a lot of time disabled people don't get to have the support, to get into like um, high quality art education. Um, and so I do find like having a space to process or to explore one's lived experience as disabled person is so critical. And of course, it can happen like in a community setting, and it sure should happen when folks spend a lot of time in a hospital working with therapists or social workers. I do wish that the conversation about their disability experience could expand outside of how are you feeling about your current treatment, or like what's hurting you right now, but more like, I mean, that's important. I'm not saying that that's not important, but it's like, do you know that there are artists who have been exploring, like, let's say, chronic illness in their artwork? Do you know that there are actually community of people who you can connect to after you leave the hospital or rehab? So I think that the precious moment that I'm seeing in this exhibition and also press here, I think it's like creating a like more fluid conversation around lived experiences, and people do not have to identify themselves as disabled or mad. But I think the first step is like knowing that this is a place where we can talk about our body, mind, and we can provide resources for people who want to further understand, like, how do you create art about your lived experiences that has been so medicalized? So I see this expression as a conversation kicker. And as for my own art, I haven't put my art in the expression yet because I've been growing them. I'm working with my calluses because like I mentioned, I only have two toes, and then when I walk, it's a lot of pressure on my two toes. So I've been harvesting them for many years, and I think by having this expression place happening right now, it really pushes me to think about how I might want to display different callus pieces that I've been saving for many years. Yeah, I'd love to hear from Katie.
This is Katie speaking. I think I'd say that the participatory element of this exhibition is yet another form of protest, just like the title. Because the art world can be incredibly elitist, right? Down to like who qualifies as an artist, who can exhibit where, who can afford to like apply to these applications. And I think the reality is like especially resonates for disabled and mad artists specifically. So I think over time, when the three of us were like mulling over this idea for the exhibition, I just feel like maybe it was another unspoken moment between the three of us, but I feel like we just kind of equally agreed that much of the conflation between art therapy and art is typically geared towards art that's produced by or about disabled and mad artists. This always seems to be this particular community. And so I think it just came naturally to us as individuals who already inhabit these spaces, like Press Here, that are typically conscious of like disability justice and access and community care, that these values should already be inscribed in our exhibition. Like that kind of communal and participatory factor is already just well ingrained in disability and mad spaces, that it just sort of happened here. And so I think almost every disabled and mad artist I know has at one point, I swear, one point has encountered this like frustrating fixation on the therapeutic aspect of their work, whether it's there or not. Like they're just always like, so tell me, like, was this a self-soothing artwork to make? And so I feel like it's important to like the aspirations of this overall exhibition that we invite individuals to participate if they would like to, because like at the core, like disability and mad culture prioritizes those with lived experiences. And so if we just kept this exhibition to only like me or Sandie and Matt's perspective, that would just be a loss. That would be a loss to an issue that seems really quite ubiquitous between disability and mad people, especially when it comes to their artwork. So I see there's a lot of deviancy going on in this exhibition I didn't fully realize before, and I kind of love it. I love it even more.
We're very deviant people. This is there's something wonderful in like in both of what you all are saying. And Sandie, you had mentioned your work is kind of this growing and in progress thing, mirroring, I think, much of this idea that people are bringing artwork or making artwork and adding it to the wall as well. And for me, it brings up the notion of crit time and this ability to be forgiving of boundaries that limit people to specific ways of acting and being. And as Katie's, you're talking about that being like an act of defiance, I think it's a wonderfully permissive space that just says the exhibition's from this date to this date, but what happens within those boundaries is fluid and can and will change, and the discussion grows from that. And so I appreciate that you both have been challenging those notions and participating in them here. But I think it also brings up an interesting question. And you've sort of, I think, both mentioned a little bit of this, but I think it'd be worth getting into just a little bit deeper. And the question would be, can an artwork participate in art therapy and not art therapy simultaneously? What does that boundary look like or not look like?
This is Sandie speaking. I really like the questions that you posed today. I think I would say yes. My short answer is yes. I think it really depends on how the artist wants to define the meaning of the art. I think the defiance of not art therapy is really talking about if this was decided by, let's say, a mental health care profession, a therapist, a doctor, and it's like, no, you create this work in therapy, it's therapy. Well, of course, it's art, it's beautiful, but still, like, I'm evaluating you, I'm assessing you. So I think that's like one very specific way of looking at disabled people's artwork. I had this experience, it was right before the holiday season. I was working with Access Living's consumers where we're just making crafty stuff that we want to put into a holiday art sale. And then we had a physical therapy intern walking past us, and then they were like, oh, what are you making? And then I'm like, oh yeah, we were making this. And then kind of described it. And then this person just said that, oh, that's so physical therapy. That's what you're doing. And then I'm like, oh no, we just want to sell them for money. And so this was another example of like, yes, the work that we make, if we want to say, yes, it's just art, or it's art objects for sale, but we weren't naming them as we are doing it to serve a purpose or a treatment goal in occupational therapy or physical therapy. And so, I mean, for some, they might not feel familiar or comfortable being a part of the art world because of, there are a lot of, what you would call that? I'm running low on my words today because I taught all day. So like, I'm like, oh, what are the words? So, I mean, like talking about access to the fine arts world. Sometimes like people don't feel comfortable enough to identify themselves as artists for this very particular reasons. So I could definitely see someone who have created art within art therapy context, wanting to get more skills or more opportunities for them to, receive constructive feedback about their art and technique and concept. Because in our therapy setting, a lot of time, it's not necessary for our therapists to talk about how well the skills are. I mean, the skills may be something that the person wants to learn, but then that isn't really the purpose of our therapy. So in many cases, disabled people don't get constructive feedback to challenge their art to be better. So as I mentioned, I'm like running low on spoons, so I don't remember what I was going to say. So perhaps like Katie can catch up from there.
And actually, before Katie, there's something fascinating, I think, in what you were saying, Sandie, in that people with disability, as they're making artwork, we do often lack a level of critique that allows the work to grow. And I've certainly noticed this, and I've talked to a lot of art students who make work about their either disability or madness, whatever the content is for them. And they tell me often that professors will shut down the critique because their work shouldn't be so personal. And they put this off. And I only interrupted, Katie, because I know you also attended the Art Institute as a student. And so I'd also be curious, on top of the question of participating in art therapy, not art therapy, I'd also be curious your experiences with critique of madness within artwork, because that's an easy answer.
Yes, it is. But yeah, so this was a really great question. I've been thinking about this paradox for a while. I would consider this a hairy question. So I do want to clarify that I'm not an art therapist. I feel like my response is going to be a little more conceptual and experimental and not more so, I mean, conceptual in a very artsy sense and questions, rather than the art therapy side of things. But as someone who was at one point was creating art professionally, I still am, but at the same time that I also had an art therapist. So I was creating art products at a certain time virtually with my art therapist while also having my independent professional practice. I feel like there are many different answers to this question. Like there's like yeses and nos. And so it might boil down to defining like what is art therapy? What distinguishes a piece made in an art therapy session from something that's created outside of it, right? So alternatively, one also might define art therapy as personal practice that they conduct at home. So this is kind of like, I've met some people just in life that have sort of reimagined and redefined for themselves what art therapy is in a very like personal, almost like ritual manner. So there's some folks that I know that claim that their morning sketch routine is for them a personal practice of art therapy, but they're also redefining art therapy in a way that detaches it from those kind of contingencies that you would normally find in therapy settings, like the issue of confidentiality, for example. But like that's not even because they're just doing this practice in their own home for themselves. Or it's also different from typical art therapy because we also think of art therapy as a tool to aid in diagnosis, where for them, again, they're just kind of doing this process for themselves, but they're redefining the term, which I always thought was really interesting, that one term, which is in itself its own discipline, could have so many other meanings on personal levels for different people. So if we're following this logic of like imagining art therapy beyond psychotherapy, and then I think it's like totally possible for art to exist that like kind of meddles in the realms of both art therapy and not therapy, especially if you're like utilizing your art practice as a therapeutic process of attempting to understand certain aspects of yourself, which, hey, I'm going to segue to that second question you asked, Matt, which is really great. Because I was a performance student at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for my master's, and before then I was an art student in Philadelphia. And a lot of my practice, it was kind of, and it sort of still is, but not really. But a lot of it before I got my formal diagnoses was really trying to figure out what or so I kind of was using art to try to do myself. Oh no, my internet is unstable, it's telling me. Hopefully.
Got a little bit choppy there for just a second, so we missed the end, I think, of that thought.
Okay, that's good. That wasn't too much then. But essentially, I used a lot of my performance work to explore symptoms that I was experiencing without quite yet knowing whether that would be the formal diagnosis or not. And so in that sense of the definition of art therapy, I was kind of using it as a self-diagnostic tool. Of course, without like formal facilitation or anything of that matter. But when I would then present this work in a formal critique setting, yeah, there was a lot, again, that kind of unspoken resistance to critiquing it because it felt too personal. Even though like maybe some performances that we were critiquing beforehand were very personal, but in a different way. Like it could have been death in the family or like migration or something. But when it came down to like madness, there was just like you could kind of feel this distance that was happening between the critics and the spectators and myself, as if they were almost kind of like looking at like an oddity. And I was like, oh. And this was a loss that I felt now that I'm no longer an art student, in that sense that there were a lot of aspects of my work that I felt should have been critiqued. There's so much there that should have been evaluated, just like my peers that were purposely ignored. Like, what is my material kind of representing the sort of symptom that, like, is that message getting across? Should the time span of the performance be longer? Like, is the costume choice good? Like, there's just so many elements that are there, even if you're not 100% comfortable talking about, or maybe not having the language yet to talk about madness in a critical setting. I just, yeah, I've noticed that had happened to me, and in my conversations with other disabled and mad art students, came to learn that happened to them too, which again there's this just wild realization that this is happening a lot everywhere, which is probably why this exhibition ended up coming to fruition, I think.
And there's certainly power to having these exhibitions in order to help facilitate those critiques. How do we actually pose language around these things? I think we can look to a lot of historic, if we look actually at Black artists or queer artists, they're posing very similar things from their experiences and perspectives that we can understand as they're engaging critical discourse. I think disability and mad artists can look to that also as a model, which is really remarkable that we're living through a moment, I think, where so many social things are happening. And if we look to each other for some of these strengths, they're totally there. So real quick, as a time check, we are at 6:43. We are going to be ending at 7, which does mean I can keep asking questions all night. This is fun. I enjoy this a lot. But I also wanted to offer an opportunity for anybody in the audience, if you want to go ahead and put a question either into the chat, or if you want to put your name in the chat and I can call on you if you would like to speak your question. Go ahead and do that. I'll give it just a second as we're doing that. And then I will, if I don't see anybody right away, I'm just going to keep asking questions. All right, so we've already got Jonathan.
Hello.
Hello.
First off, I started writing something. I decided it'd be better to just say it. Now I realize I'm bad at saying it. But I just want to say thank you both for your great insights on everything. It's really nice to be part of this conversation, which I'm not generally part of on this side. But I guess I was curious, Katie, you were saying with your involvement as a professional artist and then also as an artist as a therapeutic sense, how do either of you manage and cope with the two different worlds and needs of the capitalistic approach to art and what that forces on you, and then the more, I guess, what at in the moment it feels like the thing that you need to say versus what you're kind of being paid to say, I guess. I think there's a question. I'm not entirely sure.
This is Katie. Thank you for your question, Jonathan. I think I have an answer to this. So I guess I'm not that great of a professional artist when it comes to in terms of like capitalism and commodity. I don't like to sell my art. I'm really protective of it. I am like totally okay with doing like panel talks and live performances because people can't keep that. Like they could have recordings of it, but they're not like the objects themselves. Like in the paintings that are behind Matt, there are aspects of my archive from when I was hospitalized to like I just have this very large Matt archive that ranges from like different medications to notes from my therapist to anything. And I like to put a lot of those into my works, which therefore then I'm like, okay, I don't want anyone to have these. And also I think that a lot of people don't really want my work either. Like they want to experience it and then leave because I make very uncomfortable work most of the time because madness is unruly and it's uncomfortable. And generally people don't want to like look at representations of madness on their wall. There are some people who do, like my mom, which I appreciate. But I think in that sense of like what the big A art world is, when I was like younger, I definitely had more of this fixation of trying to get into these big wig galleries, you know, places in New York, stuff like that, or places that you even had to pay for to like apply to have your work in there. And then as I got older and sort of was introduced to disability arts and mad arts spaces and circles, and that there's lots of opportunities there, I'm much more comfortable in being a professional artist in those groups rather than being in the big capital A art world. That no longer interests me. And also I find that there's just too much like saneism that's either like clearly directed at me or in an undertone in the way that they treat my work or expect me to be present at gallery openings and stuff that I just don't feel comfortable doing. So it's a really great question though, and I'm glad that you asked that, and I hope that I answered it. And I want to give the floor to Sandie as well.
I didn't think I was good enough to be in the capital A art world because my work always has been like really personal. My dog agrees. um, from time to time that I had a couple people who approach me like, oh, do you sell your art? I'm like, not really, because the work that I make are like specifically for my hand. So earlier on when I was making more body adornment for my hands, like the idea is to make them pretty and gorgeous enough that people wish that they could wear them. But then in order for them to wear what I made, they have to chop their fingers off. So I sort of like enjoyed this, like, I'm gonna make them pretty enough that you feel like, oh, that's something that I want to try on, but sorry, you can't. And I think someone approached me and said that, oh, I'd like to get a picture of, I think, I cannot remember which art piece exactly, but they said they don't want to put it in the bathroom. And I'm like, oh, I'm kind of flattered by that. Like, but so these like conversations, I just kind of take it as like fun conversations. But honestly, I realized I don't have a lot of interest in showing my work in like exhibitions. I think my work is more about creating like relationships. And if there's opportunity for me to share my art, sure, I would love to, but I'm not trying to put myself like into these like big art scene. I'm more interested in creating art in a way like for my people. Because I think like earlier on when I start making art about my disability, there was definitely an urge that, oh, I have to prove to this able-bodied world about what disability is about, what disability is not. And then I feel like a lot of pressure to like kind of like have to meet the expectation and make sure that audience understand what disability is. And then I got really tired of it. I'm like, I don't care about what I think. I'm going to make work for my fellow disabled brothers and sisters and non-binary crip family members. Yeah, so I do feel comfortable, staying in where I am at right now. And thank you for the question.
Absolutely. No, thank you both so much. That was fantastic.
And I want to chime in just slightly because I'm different than the both of you in that I actively am seeking a capital A art career. And kind of to your point, Katie, I think I'm doing it to prove a little bit that mad and disabled people deserve to be paid for what we do. That our work is as culturally capable and relevant as the other stuff we're seeing. As much as I'd still run into the saneism and ableism within those systems, I feel like I enjoy that pushback a little bit. As deviance keeps coming up as a theme, I guess, that I just enjoy poking the bear and trying to demand that there's a little bit of justice for all of us within a capitalist system that typically ignores us.
Do you can I ask another one?
Yeah, we've got a few more minutes.
Matthew, so I guess I'm always the worst at pricing my things. How do you mentally, I mean, I know every artist has their own heads, their own thing with how you would quantify a value to that. Do you have difficulty with that, or is that something that is sort of like an act of defiance by putting a price tag and saying, well, I can price this, or is it difficult with every piece?
It can be somewhat difficult. I tend to more this is kind of getting into those business brass tacks of just doing some research and sort of finding comparable artists who I feel like legitimately I can compete with this artist at a professional level. This is what their prices are at. This is maybe about where I'm at as well. Maybe I haven't had as many exhibitions as them, so maybe it's a little lower price tag. There's, I think, a lot of things that go into it. And certainly the sort of last exhibition that I've had, I relied a lot on the gallery to help me. They knew their audience, they knew what my work was, and they guided a bit of that. And so I'm a horrible capitalist. I'm more than happy to go hands off when it comes to pricing it, but I also feel like I want artists with disability to demand what they're worth and not feel shy about it, which I think means that, yeah, we compete with the galleries and we can hold our prices the same. There's no reason to discredit that.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. We're getting down into our last few minutes. Does anybody have a quick question, anything scratching their brain? We got a question from hello, Susan. I'm curious how you approach applications, submissions for grants or exhibitions. Do you mention your disability? I ask because I recently applied for a grant for an accessible easel. There were questions about need, what inspired the applicant, and what work is about. I was awarded the grant, but also was sent feedback that bringing up disability is unfair to everybody else, that the exhibition of my work is not needed as there's enough pain and suffering in the world and so forth. Applicant won't go far on pity in the art world. I am so sorry, Susan. I feel like this is a really big topic that probably deserves a panel discussion of its own. I think we got enough time for maybe one of you, Katie or Sandie, if you want to give a quick response.
This is Sandie. I think that we should all apply to this grant, and we're going to list everything that we want for the exhibition and really name it as we want to bear the suffering of the world. That's why we want to create space for people to just scream and cry and do whatever we need to. I'm just rereading Susan's comments, and I'm just like, wow, this is going to push us to do more.
I feel very much that there probably is a good set of workshops or panel discussions around this that should occur, and perhaps that'll be the next round of Zoom, is talking through these things as artists with disability. How do we navigate these questions? Because that's it pops up more than I think we want to admit, and it's unfortunate when it does. There was one last question which I will read. I'm not sure if we have quite enough time. Hi, I am Yoon I am an SAIC art therapy student. For an artist, working on art can be painful at times, and many famous artists we know have suffered to create. I think art therapy, on the other hand, is borrowing from the good work of art. It helps and is helped by art. What about you? Do you ever find your processes difficult or painful? Do either of you have a quick couple-minute reply?
Katie, why don't you take it? Because I feel like my students hear from you enough.
Sure. Yeah, very quickly. I think that the process, or at least because I do a lot of my performance work and my paintings about really difficult symptomatic experiences and moments of psychosis that have harmed me and harmed my friends and people that have just my family members that have found it difficult to understand me or communicate with me over time. And so they're always very painful. And I think the act of presenting and being vulnerable and even sharing the work, especially in a performative sense, there's a whole different kind of level of pain. There's almost like a sense of embarrassment or shame sometimes. And I've gotten better at kind of owning the schizoness of myself over the years, especially as I've met more people like me. But certainly art can be quite painful, but I think it is much easier for me to kind of let it out through the creative process than just let it simmer inside. So
I think that's a good response there, Katie. I even for perhaps students who don't experience or live with disability in an identifiable way, I would say that art should be difficult and painful. Ultimately the work we are doing as artists is not to make our lives easy. It's to dig in deep and do some hard work, whatever that means, for whatever end. So appreciate the question as well. But as we are rounding up on our last couple of minutes, I want to respect everybody's time, and I also want to thank both the captioners, Stephen and Courtney, as well as the ASL interpreter, Olivia, for their time tonight. It's always appreciated to have all of them around. Please, if you are interested in more of these kind of Zoom panels, workshops, things like that, feel free to email me. I put my email in the chat, but I will do it one more time. If I can talk and type at the same time. I'll put the email there. If you would like to email to get onto the email list, I feel like between Susan's question, Jonathan's question, and you in there at the end, there's a lot to discuss and a lot that we can dig in really deep. And I feel like we need to do more of these. I thank you so much to Sandie, to Katie for your time. I love seeing everybody. Thank you all. I appreciate you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm staying on just to keep the chat log. Trying to make sure I got everything here. But thank you again, Sandie and Katie.
Thank you. I'd love to talk more. This
Yeah.
is,
I feel like we were getting so deep and that it could have gone on for more hours.
yeah, exactly. Matt, you say that you know Susan, right?
I do know Susan, yes.
Okay, because I'm trying to find their information which they shared, but I couldn't find it, so I may touch base with you later.
Please do. I'll totally connect you. And if I recall, Susan,
Olivia, feel free to log off.
Okay, all
Thank
right.
you so much for your
Sure.
work.
yes.
Have a good night. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. This was great. We finally, I'm so happy.
This is
Oh, is Susan still here?
2
Yeah.
years in the making.
I don't know, Susan,
Yeah.
if you want to unmute and introduce yourself.
Hello. Hi, this is Sandie. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you for sharing that horrible experience with us. Let's do
Yeah,
something.
yeah, I was really curious what, like I was devastated after I received the feedback, but just how other artists approach this and how you turn feedback like that into more art or
Susan, was it a local, like a Boise or Idaho specific grant?
the Alexa Rose.
Okay. Yeah. We should talk a lot.
Okay.
Because I do feel like there's some politics involved in those kinds of decisions and the way that those things are worded that to me are very indicative of Boise and
Mhm.
part of the reason that I needed for myself to step away,
Mm.
which is, it's really unfortunate. But I think Sandie, it'd be good to put you in touch as well, and Katie, and act as like allies in I don't know, you got the award. So I'd hate to like to cause any sort of wave in which they would retroactively pull funding. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I feel like you're worth speaking up for and letting them know that the way that that was put and worded is very dismissive and at times dehumanizing of the experience. So
Yeah, I wrote a poem about it. I'll send to you, and then I
please
haven't
do.
directly talked to them about it yet. So,
are you,
but
do you
yeah,
plan to?
am I what?
Are you going to talk to them about it?
I got the easel first.
Good call.
Yeah, but for like 2 months I didn't even fill out the paperwork. read the form because it felt like a pity easel. So I,
Yeah,
um, but I think it's using it now to kind of educate other people about the kind of responses that sorry, the dogs just got here.
yeah. No, thank you for sharing. I would love to get the poem. Sandy and Katie, I will also share with you the event details, but Susan does have a Zoom poetry, music, art thing coming up on November 4th, which might be also nice to share with students and our other groups.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
Keep me posted, please.
yeah.
Yeah, I have some recordings from that I'll share with Matt.
Oh, wait,
Oh,
it
thank
did
you so
happen. Did I have that?
Yeah, it was
It did happen.
last week.
Ah,
Oh, I am so backwards in my head. I still thought we had a week.
It's okay.
but
I'm
hopefully
sorry I
we-
missed that then. I totally had it for next week.
Oh, yeah. No, I can send you. I recorded it and I had some musicians who sang the poems.
Okay.
But the one that I wrote about the grant, like, got a lot of feedback. Like, people were crying and all that. I don't
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
moved by it, but I'll send it over to you.
Please do. Please do.
look forward to it.
I'm glad you were here.
Great. Yeah, thank you for doing this. It's great to meet you and see you again, Matt. And I look forward to your next Zoom.
Yeah, yeah. We'll do more for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
everyone.
Good night.
Good night. And I'll talk to the two of you again soon.
All right, thanks, Matt. See you later.